Hello, welcome to the Videogame Workshop podcast. Today, we're going to do a kind of walkthrough slash postmortem of one of the games that we made before. I'm Dennis,
I'm Charlie.
and today we're going to talk about Sound It Out. Sound It Out is a game that we made for PBS Kids, and we made it while we were working at Twin Cities Public Television. We're really proud of it. It got 2 Telly Awards, silver, which was really cool. And the last time that we checked the analytics, it had about 1.8 million plays. And this is across the website and also the PBS Kids Games app. So by this point, it probably has over like 2 million plays, which is really, really cool. It's cool to see those numbers. You always still get imposter syndrome afterwards, but like it's cool to see that. So we'll go ahead and walk through it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the development process of it, maybe some behind the scenes sort of stuff to give a little bit of context in terms of the development and all the people that helped make it happen. Of course, there's the Skillsville team directly from us. I was the game director on it.
Yeah, and I was the lead game designer.
And we also had help from Filament Games to make this a reality. So what you'll see here is just what came out of that whole collaboration of it. So let's go ahead and jump into it.
Yeah, so the development of Sound It Out was for a PBS Kids game, and it was for a game that was going to come out right alongside of Skillsville. So it wasn't the first Skillsville game that we made, but it was going to be the first Skillsville game that regular members of the public were going to see, not our partners or kids who had worked with us or people out in the field that we had done research with, but just general public. This is the first game that they were going to see. And because of that, we wanted to do something that would align with an episode that was going to be coming out in the first chunk of episodes. Usually we don't like to tie games directly to an episode because the comparison usually doesn't favor the game super well. Kids don't like that they can't do every single little thing that's in the game, or they expect it to be a beat per beat, basically click along with the episode narrative if it's too close. And also, we do have very specific learning goals that we're trying to hit that aren't always necessarily exactly what the TV show is trying to hit. And so while we like to take themes or ideas from the TV show, we don't like to do an episode. In this one though, we wanted there to be enough crossover from the episode that people who just saw Skillsville for the first time on TV and were excited about it and then went online or went in the PBS Kids Games app to go play would recognize some elements from what they just watched and be excited that they're in the game. So we decided to go with the sound effects artist episode, where the kids are in a sound effects artist studio and they're using sound effects to complete a movie. And so as long as we had those sorts of elements, we could do a different narrative or a different thing going on, but we would still get to see a location, some characters, maybe the idea of taking sound effects as a button and putting them in, or the being in a closet. It would look enough like it that it would be exciting, but it wouldn't be so close that it would be difficult in the comparison. So we started with that, which is a little bit different than what we usually do, where we're starting with just base game pitching from mechanic, pitching what we like for the educational content, and then finding show tie-ins afterwards. We were kind of starting with this idea of a show tie-in and knowing that that's what we were going to do. And so our game pitches were a little bit more focused on that. And we kind of just had this one area and we were pitching a couple different mechanics for within that area.
We really wanted to hit our design philosophy of live in the world, don't be married to a beat per beat adaptation for it, like some of the better ones that are out there, right? So like you said, we set up the world, we live in the world, but you're not doing the beat for beat thing from the show. If you wanted to start here, you could then watch the show and be like, oh yeah, that's kind of like the same studio that I went to, or vice versa, right? Like if you saw the show, you were like, I wanted to be in that video, and now you can, but you're not doing the exact same thing. That way it doesn't break immersion or feel like it's breaking that, like it doesn't have that ludonarrative dissonance associated with it. But I also wanted to say that this one was weird, like you were mentioning, Charlie, because we had to pitch them, but we had to pitch them in a different way. Usually we have a very specific thing that we want to do, and usually we do iterations on that thing, right? So we generally have 3 to 5 sort of things that we come up with. We pitch them. On this one, it was more like, what kind of topics do we want to cover, and which ones do match with the upcoming episodes that are going to air, that sort of deal.
Yeah, I can pull up something very unpolished, very quick. So you'll get to see a little bit of behind the scenes, like super early concepting. It's not pretty. But this is what a super early pitch can look like. So we were like, okay, if we were going to do something with the sound effects artist episode, uh, pairs with episode 105, one of the first available shows, we did something that had to do with like customizable mini movies. We went through, we had like a little overview, kind of like an intro idea of what it would sound like. You pick a sound, and it's like, okay, maybe it would look something kind of like this, right? It's like you've got Godzilla on the screen and you're going to pick what sort of sound you want to put on here with Godzilla. And it's funny because like this is what the tutorial is. It's not Godzilla, but it is like a dinosaur, and you are choosing what sound you want on there for the tutorial. We've got our little clip art in here. We've got, you see the movie and there's new sounds, and then we've got like a little overview, like, oh, there's an overview of the world, and like there's little sounds that you can collect and grab, and then you can do that. You can finish a movie, and then you've got different movie posters that you can choose from. And then you can select the scene that you want to work on in the movie, and then you add the sounds to it and you see it in the movie theater and you could replay it. And here's some of the assets from the show that we would put in the game to make it pretty, that we think like kids would enjoy seeing after they've seen it on the like actual channel, on the actual show. So this was like a super early. Dennis and I have been talking. We like sound effects artist as one of the episodes since it's in the first 5. It had some good assets, and this is kind of like an overview of the main parts. Like the main thing is that you're choosing a sound. There's an overworld. You go from movies to scenes, picking sounds. That's the main big early pitch. So it's not super complicated, and it's not super, pretty done yet, but this was like a super early pitching idea of like, what are we going to do? And it's cool because like this is the game. Like it didn't change all that much. It got a lot more polished. A lot of things got worked out, things that maybe you don't appreciate if you weren't there, like all the UI, UX things, all of that. But this is the base of the game.
But you know what they say, it's like an overnight success, like years in the making. Also, I wanted to point out really quickly on this one that when you have a low grade prototype like this, you kind of do it for multiple reasons. So one thing, you want to make sure that people aren't immediately tied or enamored with something that they see here, and then later on they're like, what happened to that thing, especially if they're not on the direct development team, because things change, right? Like for many different reasons, some of these things did end up like the final version, but a lot of these things changed. Like this part had to account for your inventory. Where is your inventory at the time? Right now, you kind of have like 3 things in front of you. This was before we knew that we were going to have like the filters associated with it. So obviously, that's going to change. That's going to evolve. If you pitch this and then someone's like, "I really wanted those curtains. I really, really wanted those curtains," because like the prototype was too high depth, then you're going to have problems, because if you have to change things for gameplay views, another stakeholder that's like, I really wanted those curtains, is not going to like that. And so you're going to have to iron that out between the two people who are asking for changes.
It's
So
true.
again, yeah, you have to fill that in, but then you also have to be specific enough, right?
Yeah, it's true because these assets I did have access to, and you'll see in later versions of wireframes, I do start using them to make prettier wireframes. But the thing is that if you put really pretty nice assets in wireframes, like Dennis was saying, it does predispose people, especially if they're not working on the game or seeing it every day. If they see it and it looks finished in a game wireframe, they just kind of get it in their head that it is in the game. And so then when they play the game and it's not there, it's not just that the thing that they wanted isn't there, it's that a thing that they wanted has been taken out of the game. Right? So it's kind of like they
Yeah.
feel like a loss of something rather than like wanting something to be added, which isn't great, especially when, it's like I could have like used any of these assets like up here, but then like those kind of would have been stuck as options this early on when we hadn't even really started developing yet.
Some of the things that we've already talked about here are kind of like the pitches, but even before that, there's pre-production. We tend to use something closer to like the Cerny method out of Sony, which emphasizes like a heavy, heavy pre-production, because you can make a lot of those changes before you have to start spending money, before you have to start making a lot of more costly decisions that lock you out of things. And one of the things that I wanted to share with that is a long, long time ago, we also made games for Hero Elementary. And one of those games was about sounds. So I would say that this is kind of like a precursor to that because we experimented with some of these ideas. I think the reason that the pitch was so tight this time around was because we were exploring different things in this game. And then we identified some things that we really wanted to call back on and we really wanted to emphasize in the future games. So I'm not going to play through this whole thing. It's also available. This one was not featured on PBS Kids, but it has some of the cool stuff that we were talking about in terms of like the overworld, but the way that you interact with it is very, very different. Specifically, the part that I wanted to show off in here was this individual part where you actually tap on different things to explore how the sounds, where the sounds come from. And I wanted to point that out because there's so many things that you could explore in terms of the subject matter of sound. And this one specifically was more on what causes sound and how do the things that you interact with change the sounds that are produced. And really, I think even back then, that was cool, but we wanted to do something with those sounds. So that kind of evolved into something else that we really wanted to get into that we didn't have the opportunity to do because the focus was so very different. So when we were able to
Yeah.
really focus on like, hey, what do you use those sounds for, or what can you do with those sounds, then we were able to kind of explore this second sort of approach, which was we love looking at different sorts of inspirations across like various sorts of games. We obviously like to talk about different games and what they do and the cool things that happen. And one of the videos that we were seeing in the past was how a Foley artist for like Plants vs. Zombies 2 was able to create some of the iconic sounds that you hear. So here it's kind of like the layering stuff, but later on they kind of get into like examples of like, here's a pea shooter. This is how it sounds. This is how it's made. The kind of interesting, or like, this is called collecting sun. This is how you do this. This is maybe what produces this sound, and isn't that interesting?
Yeah. It is really interesting because we did take so much inspiration from our previous sound game, which was a STEM topics game, right? It was about pitch and size and how they influence each other. But really, we enjoyed that there's an overworld where you could go around and collect sounds. And we wanted to do that again, but totally different. But yeah, this area being the area where you collect sounds from the real world uh, as kind of like part of the learning process for kids of where the sounds in movies and sound effects come from. We wanted them to have to do the gathering process as well, not just like getting sounds from like buttons, because they would make that connection easier if they could see it from a real world area.
We did a lot of stuff on here to try and make it more lively because we were working with some constraints that we'll probably talk about. But I love the fact that we were able to convey so much with like 2 frames of animation and then like a random triggering of these individual sounds. Like they don't step on each other. Um, I think it's truly random on this. Maybe prioritize to do things that you haven't encountered yet, but that's pretty cool.
Right.
So you kind of still see the world alive, and you still see and hear that sort of stuff. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I think I know already what your favorite is, which is
Yeah,
the
and I had to
loon.
work really hard to keep that.
It's the loon front and center because you think that loons sound creepy, and I, as a native Minnesotan, think that they sound beautiful and not creepy at all. And so we had this talk back and forth about loon sounds, and we decided like we're a Minnesota studio, we have to put a loon in, little mini shout out.
Okay, but there was also a huge reference in terms of the loon. I think I talked to this even like when I was defending it. Not only is it a unique sound, which is really really cool, it's also the sound that they used in Stephen King's Pet Cemetery because they wanted a weird noise, and so they wanted this like weird noise that people would hear and be like, "Oh, what is that? That's kind of creepy." So, yes, of course, we're
It's
gonna
like, what
have
do you
fun.
mean? It's a loon. It's beautiful.
That's creepy. It's haunting.
It's
Yes.
hauntingly beautiful.
Okay. All right.
So we did early concepting. We did pitch. There was obviously, as Dennis would say, a there, something that was fun and sticky and interesting. And so then once the pitch is accepted by stakeholders, then we, move on into making a full GDD. So we're writing out everything so that we can get it ready, send it over to developers, work from there with them.
So here's an example of a design doc. Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but you'll know that there's like an overview sort of deal. For us, we had to go deeper into like the show tie-ins and the audience, that sort of deal. But you can kind of see like we've kind of kept the high level sort of ideas of what the flow is, all which we were only able to do because we had the pitches and because we had prototypes that we made behind the scenes even before it got to this point. We had some idea of where we wanted to go. We had the idea of like what are the major areas, like the outside area, the editing bay, that sort of deal. Goals, having very clear goals, I think was really nice too, because then you sort of direct like where do you want to end up with the game versus and make that very very clear. It really helps with cutting, and it really helps with making sure that you're on track, because you could have a really cool idea, but if it's not supporting one of those goals, it might be something that you want to put on the back burner.
I think also
Seems, yeah.
something interesting about the goals section that might not be what people initially think is, you know, our main goal that we even have listed there is have kids feel like they're sound effects artists helping to finish a really big movie.
Mhm.
I think especially when you're thinking about kids' educational games, you might think that the main goal is like very high, like psychological, educational, measurable successes. Like children are, 20% better at this skill by the time that they've done 10 minutes of this. And that's not where we're at, right? Like the
Yeah.
goal of this was about cognitive flexibility and about learning about what being a sound effects artist is. But really, if the kid can't walk away from that feeling like I did what a sound effects artist does, or I made a movie, I helped make a movie, then we really didn't hit our main goal of the game, right? Like if they can play this
Hmm.
game for 5 or 10 minutes and they don't feel like they were doing the work of a sound effects artist, then we failed. So that is
Right.
the big main goal. Everything else is great and we do want to hit it, but like that is the main thing. Like if you can't hit that, then none of the other ones are going to work either, which I think is important to acknowledge because sometimes it doesn't feel like it's big enough to be the main goal, but it is the base that everything else is built upon, especially with kids. It's like if you can't have that, then none of the other stuff is going to work.
And really, it's such a guiding light, right? Because this specifically is like, this is part of the reason why the reveal at the very end, we wanted to make sure really hit that mark. Like you were at a premiere, they were clapping for you. You had the big effects on the screen, you had the score, you had your sound effects, everything was mixed in, and you could watch it in the back of the theater, kind of like how a director would when it finally came out. We wanted to really hit that power fantasy, and like Charlie said, another part of this was really if you're making stuff for kids, like you got to respect them too. They're doing you the favor of playing through your game, and they're not going to go back and dig deeper into the content that you have if you don't hook them initially. Part of the cool thing about this was going back and thinking about what are the different types of sounds that I can produce and how, or even the subverting of it, because that gave rise to a more complex understanding of what's going on underneath. Anybody can fill in like a, hey, let's put the sound effects in this part of the movie, or even worse, like if we had a right answer, the replayability of that would be like next to zero, right? So we really wanted to make sure that first you had your power fantasy, you had that fulfilled, and then we allowed you to go back and reflect on it, and maybe break it, have some fun with it.
It's very important to note that like kids putting in the wrong sound isn't a thing here, right? Because we want them to be using the skill of thinking like, what sound do I want to put in? How can I use the sound differently? How can I manipulate it? How many different ways can I use the same sound? Like that creativity and mental flexibility is the goal. So if their personal goal is to make it as funny as possible, and they're still thinking of 3, 4, 5 different ways to do that and then deciding on the best one, they are hitting the learning goal,
Yeah.
even if the outcome is something that doesn't sound like clapping or doesn't sound like a T-Rex roar at all. I think that there's a very easy interpretation when you first see the game to think like we are going to give them a gold star if they pick the correct sound and the correct filter and it sounds the best. And that just doesn't align with the learning goal at all. That's not the point. So we really wanted to lean into the silliness because some kids are going to want to find the best sound that fits the game the best. And we worked really hard to make sure that that doesn't exist and
Yeah.
that there's a lot of things that sound good, but that there's no like clear, correct sound. And there's a lot of sounds that are really, really silly so that we can get kids to be like, oh my God, that's hilarious. I need to try that in a different context. Let me see if I can use that over here and like keep the flexible thinking going.
Subversion is still evidence of mastery on that.
Right. Yeah. Then besides goals, we get into what the mechanics are going to be, our technical information that we have, of expectations about what systems and things we're going to be using, things that are more for our developers.
Some of the technical sort of stuff is in here too. This is more specifically in terms of like, what engine do we think we want to have? What components do we think are necessary? An example movie script. So this is the racetrack one that didn't actually make it in,
But it
but
gave
some
a
of
good
that's
enough
yeah,
idea. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And even on here, like we said, we still had that idea of like the experimentation was very deliberate, and we wanted to make sure that the combination was in the forefront of that.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about combinations and about how that would work and how it's really important to us so that every kid had a very different experience and didn't feel like they were choosing between like 4 or 5 options, but they were choosing really making something unique. And when we had the
Here we go.
idea, yeah, when we had the idea to add in like effects that could affect the sound that they were using, that wasn't from the show. It kind of came out of necessity, partly that we were like,
Mhm.
okay, we want to give them a ton of options. We want them to feel like they're doing this, but we do not have the size, the capacity to add in 50 to 100 different sounds. So what are we going to do? And then I think, Dennis, I think you had the idea that we could use in-engine filters
Yeah.
rather than creating a separate sound effect for each one, but we could just have like, oh, if we added like 5 filters, then we would just multiply every single sound by 6 because there would be the main and then the 5 different filters of it. And we were all just like, oh my God. And then we started bringing it out to some kids, like just like kids of
Yeah.
people in the office. And it was so clear because they were like, they know what a filter is because they use Snapchat, because they use
Hmm.
TikTok. Like they know what that word filter is. It's not a new vocabulary word to them. They know that it takes something and then it changes it a little bit. And that was wild and so exciting. And like effects works too. I think either one, they were just very familiar with the idea of adding something onto a video or a sound and having it change. That was great because there was a concern that if we added this extra thing, then we would not only have to tutorialize what a sound effect is, but then like what a special effect or filter on top of that is. And then that might be getting too complicated. But because there were so many kids who already knew what it was, we were like, done. And we basically like quadrupled the amount of sounds that we could have in the game without adding any storage space, which was insane and so exciting.
Right. It did affect, especially since the initial pitch was a little bit different and didn't have those filters. What we could do in terms of like reward, because originally we were thinking about like unlocking different areas that you could visit so that you could have access to different sounds at the different areas. And that would have been cool, right? Like I think we wanted to be able to add like more sounds and stuff like that. But this
We
addition of
talked
the
about
filters was
like,
really nice. Yeah.
yeah, we talked about like, oh, if we had like 10 different sounds in like 4 different areas, then we'd have 40 and we could like preload the sounds for one area and then outload them before we loaded another area. And that might help us with space, but then we're going to get long load times. And it's like, it was working, but it wasn't totally working. And so this was just like the perfect, cool fix for it.
Yeah. It's also cool what we did in terms of unlocking because I think rewarding people with filters is a really, really nice reward because it expands the amount of things that you have access to.
Whenever they start a new movie, while there's still empty slots down there, they get a new filter, which kind of reinvigorates the process of finding sounds and trying out new filters rather than feeling like I did one movie, I saw all the sounds, I'm good, I'm done. Like they get something new. And also every time they start a new movie, their inventory for sounds completely resets. So they have to go out and find the sounds again. And that's not just busy work, but it is also to kind of reinforce thinking about the sounds in a new context again. Like they didn't just collect all of the sounds once and now they're going to spend the rest of the game only using those sounds, but they're going to be forced to kind of like see a scene and go out and decide what sounds they want to grab and collect with this new context of the new movie that they're seeing. Um, this game is very much about mental flexibility and thinking of
Hmm.
things from a new perspective and a new light. And so kind of soft resetting helps with that without making them feel like we're taking progress away from them.
It kind of follows like one of the Nintendo design strategies that we really like, right? In terms of like introduce a concept, master the concept, flip the concept. And we really kind of did that with like, flipping the concept by adding a new filter. And we also were very, very cognizant of which filters you started off with. So we wanted to have the ones that made some arguably like the biggest impacts first, right? Like the slow and fast that not only impacted them, but were also intuitive. And then introduce the other ones afterwards as a reward, but also as a way that you didn't have that like mental overload of like, oh, there's so many filters that I have to deal with at once. We kind of backed it away to something that hit hard and were intuitive. So that way you could have that ready to go. You can interact with what's going on underneath instead, right? Which was more like, how do I experiment to get the sound that I want with the tools that I have, and then expand your tool set as you're more comfortable with that.
Once we started actually building something, then we got to our prototype phase. Well before alpha, there's no instructions or anything going on in the game. We have, like a couple sounds, we have like one scene or so, and we're just going to ask kids what to do with it. So this is the playtesting protocol that I put together along with our researchers to bring this out to a whole bunch of kids and see what they thought of it, get some data and feedback. We wanted to see if they were going to hit the goals or come away with the sort of understanding that we thought they would, and also get some data about like what sound effects are they using, what filters are they using, is there a big bias anywhere that we aren't thinking of. This was our prototype, so we still had time to make some large changes if we needed to, so we needed some really broad feedback. So it'd have the playtest goals and a little introduction, a little note like for the researcher of what they can say. They don't have to follow this exactly. And then just some notes about what preconceptions do they come in with about sound effects and sound effects artists. They grab the tablet. This is kind of what they see and kind of the script. Remember, there's nothing in the game that tells them what to do yet. It's literally just like a screen with buttons. So the researcher has to kind of be the tutorial for them at this point and has to tell them this is a brand new game and there's things, and they're very excited because no one else has ever played it before, and the kids love to hear that and give feedback. So they go through and they see, and then we get some feedback kind of about like, here's the scene, mark what sounds they picked, like what did they put in here, mark what filters they used. The note section is for things like, oh, when they picked the chicken, they laughed loud out loud, like, oh, or like they were kind of bored and wiggling during this part, or like they did not like the tomato sound, they like stuck their tongue out, they thought that was gross. Like that's what that's for. And we were just getting kind of basic feedback about like that. We're always looking for things that we wouldn't expect, or like I said, biases, especially anything that would come up with like an age bias, like older kids don't like something versus younger kids do, gender bias, anything that we can like find with just a small group of kids that we're looking for. And then we always ask them about, would you play it again? What would you change about it? Is there anything that you wish was in there? Because that's kind of like a fun way to get at the kids about like, would they play it again? A lot of times they'll say no because there's not enough content, right? And then you
Mhm.
ask them like, if there was different stuff, if there were different sounds, would you play it? And they're like, oh yeah, definitely. It's like sometimes they can be very literal and you have to get at it. Like if you say, what would you change about it? Then they say, I would add more game. And it's like, that's great. That I would add more game is like a fantastic piece of feedback because it means that they loved it, right? Like if they
Mhm.
want more of it, then that's a good thing. A lot of times we also get not so helpful feedback, like, what would you change about their game? And they're like, I would add racing with cars.
Or
Like it's,
everything is not helpful, and it's pretty popular
yeah,
too.
I would change everything about this game, yeah, and make it a different game. I also do love, we always get one kid who says that they would add animals.
Yeah.
like with no context of what the animals would be doing. They just love animals, which is great.
Yeah, like the feedback thing is interesting too. And I think especially depending on the team that you're working with, I think this is another reason why having your goals clearly stated in whatever version of a design doc you do is super important because there could be a lot of good ideas that come out from here. And if you don't have like a preset direction or more specifically, if you don't have like a preset filter for what you want to do, that could take over some of the direction of the design. And you really don't want that. You want it to be able to further the goals that you already have. I also wanted to say two things about like the play testing that we usually try and do. One of them you already kind of talked about, like, because it comes in with like hardly any tutorialization. It's also really nice to see what people naturally gravitate to, what they already bring their schema to, right? Like, because really for an effective tutorial you don't really want to spend like a ton of time on stuff that they already get right off the gate. Like, you want to focus on some of the things that are tricky, or you want to revisit some of those sticky points. So if you throw them in with no real guardrails, you can kind of see where those pressure points are and then focus your design more on alleviating that and addressing that. The other thing was a good play test, especially later on, focuses on answering a question about your prototype, right? Like, you want to go in and sort of say like, do kids know how to collect sounds? Because sometimes that those are the best prompts, right? Like, you set them in front of it and then say like, okay, go and collect sounds. And then do they know how to navigate out of this area? Do they know how to put it in their inventory? Like, there's a lot of chains that you have to do through that. And you can learn a lot by just seeing what they do with a simple prompt like that. There's also definitely a art to how much before you take out that first prototype, because I think ours got pretty close to like what you see at the tutorial, or we had to make some minor changes, right? Like, we didn't want to show you like all three scenes. We found that out really quickly because we wanted you to start collecting some of the stuff right away. So we made
Yeah.
changes based off of that.
Yeah, we needed there to be multiple scenes in the prototype so that we could see how kids would navigate between the scenes and see how much trouble that was, how much prompting they needed, if they ever went back to a scene that they already did, or if they just considered it done. But we didn't want it to be like, we're going to show you all three scenes that you have to sit through. Because we didn't think that that would work either. And then we wanted them to use different sounds and like see if they would use the same sound again ever, which hardly of them ever did. We got so much good feedback from that early prototype because we came in to dev so clear on like, these are the concepts that we want to hit. Our goals are so clear. Let's build something that we can take out to kids and see where we're at. And then we did see where we were at. And so then we got to get into like, now we're going to build out the whole game. Let's take a look at what do we need to teach them to play the game, and what can we kind of gloss over? What don't they need a lot of hand holding on? Like I mentioned, like they kind of knew what a filter was. I didn't need to spend too long on that. So this is where I started making like the flow of it. So this is the flow of the main game once they're already past the tutorial. But then we started getting into what the flow of the actual tutorial would be, which would be the first time that you ever played the game. So you're going, title screen, you get your intro, you're in the editing bay, then you go to the outside. From the outside, you can go back into the inside. You can go back and forth. Once you're in the movie theater, then you go into movie select. You know, already you can see that like it's changed a little bit because there is that kind of in between space that we created between the editing bay and the movie theater where you have that final check, but that hasn't come up yet in our testing. So this is what it looked like. And then we would get into, I'm going to take this, but I'm going to make actual wireframes for it. This is when like the wireframes start getting a little bit more polished and like using assets from the show. And that's also partially because the tutorial is such a tricky, finicky thing, especially the scripting of it. There's so many things that it needs to hit in such a short amount of time so that the kids don't get bored or feel like they're being condescended to, that I really wanted to nail it down with visuals with all of our stakeholders. So our educational team that's going to be talking about, are we hitting all of the right vocabulary words? Are we hitting all of the things that the kids need to know from this? And our UI UX people who need to make sure that every single button that they're going to have to teach how to use has been touched at some point in the tutorial, that there's like some sort of path for them. all of that. So that's why these get made pretty early and pretty robustly. You can see like it does change from here. This is not the final one, but it does kind of give an idea of like you're going to have a sound and you're going to put it in, you're going to get some feedback. You go get another sound from outside, you collect it, you record it. Now that gets added into your inventory. I've got even like a little GIF of things being added into an inventory. Then you go back. Now you can choose between the different sounds. We're going to go to the movie theater and we're going to get a new filter or some sort of thing, some sort of badge. And then you'll go back out to here. And then I've just got a list of like every screen with every single button on that screen so that we can talk back and forth about like, okay, is this every button? How are we going to lay this out? How much room is it going to take? Are we using all four corners of the screen? Is it way too much? Have we tutorialized every button that needs to be tutorialized? Are we missing any of them? There's so many more buttons in a game than you think that there are. And this already changed a lot. Like I said, there's nothing in between these two screens, which there will be in the tutorial right now, where you can see there's nothing about tutorializing the filters, which definitely got added in later because we did have the filter as something that happens after the tutorial, but we didn't want to do that because we wanted on second playthrough you to be able to start in a movie. And if you did that, then we would have to tutorialize the filter every time you restarted the game. And so we didn't want to do that. So it got added into the main tutorial. But all of those are things that happened after we made this early one. And if we hadn't have made these screens and talked through it in this detail, we probably wouldn't have nailed down that tutorial in time for alpha testing. It probably wouldn't have been until beta that we realized that we needed the filters to be in the tutorial, that we needed this different VO line. So kind of front loading that helped a lot with all of those different options and stakeholders and problems.
You know, something I think that we both like and we both do pretty well is break the stuff. When we
Yeah.
sort right, because we talk about this stuff a lot, and generally, like after we get past like the this is the main goal and sort of agree on that sort of deal, we start thinking like there's been so many meetings, right? Like where we come in and say like, so I was thinking about this last night, but how do we get back to, or what happens if you have too many, or you know, that sort of stuff where we actively, like, not in a malicious way, but we're trying to like shake it and be like, okay, what are the parts that are broken? Did anything break on that? Like, what should we revisit? What should we see?
Doing everything possible to break it, which is kind of like another step that I do that I always worry is so annoying for our developers that I'm working with. But for example, this is like my notes that I sent over on the alpha release candidate, which is basically one script, like one sprint before we hit alpha, they'll send over a release candidate, which is basically like, this is alpha, but with some bugs in it. And over the next sprint, they're going to be like taking out bugs. And so this is my chance over that sprint to like look over the alpha and find anything that's like needs to be fixed right away or needs to be flagged before we took the alpha out. And this is me kind of going through and like putting notes and screenshots and trying everything in my power to break this or to make something go wrong or to pretend that I don't know what's happening. And what happens if I have 8 different lemonade Slurpee things in my inventory? It's like QA testing, but I'm not
Mhm.
looking for bugs. I'm looking for design flaws that can be exploited or that could be better, right? Like, how could I
Yeah.
make this flow work better? I'm not just looking for like, oh, when you click this too many times, the screen gets like a green bar down the middle. That's like a separate thing. This is like only for design stuff.
And there's a total art to this too, that you really have to, I think, build up some rapport, or be very clear at the very least in terms of like how you want to approach this, right? Because like there's parts that are obviously placeholder or are things that are going to be removed. So it's worth it to at least talk with your team and sort of say, like, I know this is supposed to be removed, but I'm going to track it on here just because I want to be verbose. I want to be clear about like all the things that we need to address, because I know that at least in my past, there's definitely been friction around like, well, that was flagged as a bug, but it obviously is placeholder, or like this hasn't been updated, but we just talked about it. And it's more about being clear and going through the design flaws and what needs to be done instead of like not trusting that it will get done. We know it'll get done. It's just that we're trying to be thorough about everything about it.
Right. Like, here's a good example. The player should hear the sound before playing the first time, like filter a specific trigger thing. Like that's worded really bad because I was like taking notes, whatever. But basically, what we're getting at is that like if you can click on a filter when you select the sound, then the first time that you're ever hearing that sound is with the filter added. And is that a problem? Is it only a problem in the tutorial? Do kids know what the bass sound is? Do we need to highlight the none filter so that they know that it's happening with none? Or because they didn't click the none filter, we don't need a highlight on it. Like that's the sort of conversation that comes out of these sorts of weird notes. But then, yes, as Dennis, as you were saying, like some of them are also just like, I know we talked about this literally yesterday, but I need to write it down just as part of the documentation for it. So some of them are just silly, but that's okay.
Yeah, but talking through it too also helps because your team is like has a wealth of information, right? So like the highlighting stuff in terms of the filters, like you were saying, I know in the end we chose like radio buttons because it was better than the highlight and it communicated it better in terms of like this one that's pressed down, that's the thing that is active. And if you press something else, everything else pops up, right? So there's no stickiness of like multiple filters or different sorts of things like that, which we could do. But then you get into that like also weird thing of like, when do you chain the filters? And that starts getting closer into the like audio manipulation sort of part of it versus like the core of the Foley artist. Again, it's like, it's not a bad idea. It's just not supporting the main pillar or goal that we were going with. So that also helps too.
That's when then the little notes start becoming topics that then we actually have design conversations about. For example, like this one, like, can we keep the sounds ever present? You know, do we have this minimizing arrow back and forth? Do we want to encourage players to switch sound as much as possible? If so, then the sound bar should be out. That's more of a visual prompt, but we don't have a lot of screen space. Is it going to overtake? Maybe it's only on that. Or like I said, should the none filter always be on by default? So we need a separate button for it. Can we add space for more filters so that down the line we'll have room for it? You know, can we have touching screen that's taking up so much of our screen room be the play button for that scene rather than having a separate button, which is something that we actually did do. And then we just added a separate play button as an overlay on the screen so that it was more optional showing, like the tabs. This is when we got the cool little bottom part that we talked about on the overlay.
Yeah, because that solves a design decision that we were thinking of, right? Like in terms of like there wasn't really a very clear way to see all the decisions that you made right away. So this was a really nice way to solve that versus like there was already so much stuff in the editing room that we had to get in. We had to get in the inventory, we had to get in the SFX, we had to get in the view, we had to get into the switcher. So just having a good overview before you send it, it was really nice to solve it this way.
Right. And then can we make sounds consumables so that it would be more intuitive? The first reaction when you're making these, like, is to use this inventory almost like a soundboard. So, like, you record the cow once and you just have that cow sound and you can use it as many times as you want. Thank you. Uh, but instead, because of our age group and because we wanted to like make sure that they were using mental flexibility, is that we made one recording of the sound, one physical object that represented the sound. And they're taking that sound out of their inventory and putting it into the scene to use. And that's not to say that they can't have the cow sound for all three scenes. They can use the cow as many times as they want. It's just that each one is represented as its own object to use. And that made it easier for kids to understand in a one-to-one way. Like, I got this sound here, and now I'm using it in this scene here. It's like a real object rather than thinking, I got this sound here, and now I'm just using this sound all over the place. I own this sound. It doesn't feel as direct of a connection. Um, but having it be a button that you can place physically in places was really nice. And you can just use it as many times as you want. And it also helped with using filters because one cow is used here with with like a rabbit filter, and another cow is used somewhere else with the turtle filter. And they're both the same sound, but because they're separate objects, it doesn't confuse the player. Like, how come the cow sounds different now? I put this filter on it. Well, it's like, well, you didn't. That was a different copy of the cow. But
Mhm.
now, since they're separate buttons, it's very clear to be like, well, I touched that one. I didn't touch this one. It just cleared up a lot of things.
It also helped us with the overworld inventory collection sort of stuff, right? Like it kind of made more sense that you were gathering a sound file and instead of just using that over and over, like you said, you you have to purposefully think about how many times you want to record it, just like a Foley artist would, um, because you want to make sure that and plus it's more interesting, right? Because you can go into the overworld and you can say like, I really need those three like tomato sort of things because I have ideas that I want to use in them
I'm going to use
versus
it
like,
3 different ways, or I'm going to
right,
use the same
exactly.
one. Um, Actually, if you can go into the overworld and fill up your inventory all the way, just get copies. Yes, I want it. Yes, I want it. Okay, now do another one. So if you click yes,
We don't have room for any more sounds. Which one should we
this was
replace?
helpful too, because if we had it so that you could only get one cow or only get one tomato, it would be confusing if then when you went to go get a unique sound, it said, we don't have enough room for this, because you had already used 3 separate tomatoes or 3 separate cows in your scenes. So how come all of a sudden now there's not enough room? You know, like now that they're physical objects and you can see the multiple copies of them, it's easier. And you might be able to look and say, which one do I want to replace? And it's like, well, I already have one of those. Just at a glance, you can tell how many copies you have. So that made that a little bit easier as well. And you can see we have this full inventory on the side, but we do still have an object sound in the scene. So you're not even limited to 6. You technically have 6 and then the 3 slots in the scene, 7, 8, 9. So you can
Pro
have
tip.
9 sounds at once if you want. And then when you click on one to add it, it will just swap them out in your inventory, which allowed for a lot more flexibility. And like I said, kind of forcing kids to think things through, like in a way that was more flexible and focused on what sounds they wanted to use and less about how copying sounds and file structure works, which is not what I wanted to be the focus for this. This was an entire huge conversation because it opened up this huge can of worms about every use case that could possibly happen with how many tomatoes, how many different types of tomatoes, what happens when you take something out and you put it in. So like now you can choose change scenes. Now you can add this. If you choose to change scenes, you can go this. If you do outside, you can go like this. You can add more. There were just so many bugs that it could introduce. And then when you started to replace sounds, are you replacing the old sound? Are you replacing only new sounds or versions of sounds? But all of this got worked out through just like slides with it's like this back and forth between us and the other designers and their like software engineers and UI UX designers, and all of that happened in here in conversations like this when we were deciding our final sounds.
Oh yeah, I remember the parrot. Like, I was gonna make a note about like how I think it was the rooster. The rooster really slowed down, or like the loon really slowed down. Is really really long, and so we had
Uh-huh.
a parrot one that would repeat it 3 times because we were trying to think of like what are the in memory sort of manipulations that we could do, right? And just like repeating it 3 times was a pretty easy one that we were thinking of doing, but really like in practice, those manipulations, those changes made it just so long. And I think it was one of those things of like the very first time you hear it, you can't cancel it because we want you to hear it. So it was just too much friction introducing that way.
It was interesting too because sometimes we would think of like what effect do we want first and then try to come up with what iconography we could use for it easily for kids, and there just was not an icon. And then when we got into this idea of like, well, what if they were all animals, because obviously rabbit is fast and turtle is slow, so then like what other animals could we use that then would be sounds? And then we were kind of going the opposite direction, which is really funny because we were like, a whale could be like echoey reverb, and that's in the final. And so I think we did end up doing all animals except for one, which is a robot. And it's just like a face of a robot and it makes it sound all robotic, like, you know, and like that's great because it's like, it's fine. Kids know what that is. But it is like, you can't just say it's a backwards filter or it's a reverb filter because then you have to teach what that is. And it's like, it's not bad, but again, it's not the focus. And I don't want to spend time on something that's not the focus of the game.
And it's definitely more, you know, bottom up design versus like a top down sort of design. Like you could argue that like obviously we're in the world, so there's a lot of things that are associated with it. But I think in terms of like the initial ideation, that's where that was super important. That like top down sort of design of like what can we do inside of the world, and then after that we tend to do bottom up because we want to focus on the interactions and the mechanics way more than the other parts that might change in production. We had the script and we had some, I don't know if we had fun packs or animatics for this at that point. I don't think we did when we pitched it, like,
We did.
but like, oh okay, yeah, oh wait, that's right, because this came later, like, yeah, but sometimes we don't have the luxury of that. So top down can get you in a lot of trouble if you do that, because if something changes in production and significantly changes the context of your game, that can lead to some issues.
I also just briefly wanted to share kind of what the script looks like when it's finished, because I thought that this is interesting. You know, we have like the text, and then we have like what line number it is, and the line, the note it's from, the VO file name, like all of this. And this is all like that side and not even built, like that's not even what I was working in. I was working in a much grosser version of this. This is like the nice cleaned up version. We
Hmm.
have like the tutorial, and then we would go back and forth and about where they were going, specific triggers, like if the players completed all three movies, play this line. If they use the fast filter, use this line. Anytime the player clicks on the third movie in the movie selection screen, click do this line. So those are like specific ones outside of that. When the inventory is full, they have the scripts in the movies. These are like the three lines for that, and this is who's speaking. All of it is done in spreadsheets. Like 75% of game design is done in
Oh,
spreadsheets,
100.
and there's no spell check, so do your best.
Also, huge shout out to the voiceover artists that we were able to get for this. That was another part of it, right? Like just staffing that, because on games like this, because of contracts and stuff like that, and all other AAA games too, right? Like you aren't necessarily going to get the exact same people, and getting people that are close enough is really hard. You have to try out so many things. I think we had to
I
like,
will say,
yeah,
like, really quickly, I do want to say we would get the same people if we could. Like,
oh yeah,
if we could hire the people from the TV show to be the voice actors in the game, we would do it in a heartbeat. And a lot of the times it's like it's not up to us. We're not like trying to pay someone else less. It's for some reason they're not available, or there's a union rule, or you know, they're based in a different country, so there's some weird stuff there. But yeah, we use sound alikes a lot
mhm,
for reasons outside of our control, and finding a
yeah,
good sound alike can be
contracts.
really hard. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. 100% contracts. And we try and do our best in house, but that doesn't usually work.
Yeah. You don't want to hear my early VO stings that I have in games.
So this part of the podcast is the extra credits sort of part of it, or like the bonus levels sort of part of it, right? Like what would we have done if we had some more time, or what are some cool things that we really were thinking of doing that we just didn't get to at that time? So I always said if we could make a Sounded Out Deluxe, I would love to have implemented something that we did like an Operation Investigation. And that would be to record and have your recordings show up as consumable objects that you could manipulate inside of the game. I think that that would be so cool,
And by
because
like
not,
record, you
yeah,
mean for real, like a kid
yeah,
could hit
yeah,
a button in the game and
right.
it would use the microphone on the
Yeah,
device, and they'd be recording a real world sound to use in the game. I think that's such a
yeah,
good idea.
yeah. In Operation Investigation, we did that with we took pictures and we were able to have kids classify the pictures and use the same engine backend, which was really fun for them. They were able to like modify it, change it, that sort of deal. If we could do the same thing for sounds on this, I think that that would be so cool. And we already had like, mock-ups and diagrams of how this might look. Like I think we were going to use like the sound booth part of the TV show that we didn't show in any of these other parts, right? To kind of set up like, hey, you can do it at home. Like, go ahead and try this out. I also wanted to say that, additional movies and content packs is 100% something that we would have done, including like seasonal sort of content. Like, I think it would have been awesome to be able to do like different sorts of seasons and sort of mimic like releases of different movies inside of the game, because that would have been fun, right? Like this quarter or whatever, right? Like it's the holiday season, so let's get you in with like a Christmas movie or a Hallmark movie or like a cooking show with the holidays or whatever. or it's spooky season, right? Like, let's go ahead and change up like the sounds and the movies that you can edit, right? So, like, the sounds would change, or you could go to different locations. And the way that we structured this was so modular that we could do that with a very small footprint because like the movies like we talked about, they were basically like 2 or 3 frames per scene and like 1 or 2 lines of VO, then 1 or 2 like background stings. And then if you really math it out, it would probably break down to like 4 unique sounds per movie, right? Because we had 3 movies and we had 12 sounds. So that was roughly like four, maybe additional filters, but that we would have ran into trouble with because of the actual like sound booth, like UI, like expanding that or changing that, that sort of thing. But even aside from that, just introducing like, it's spooky season. So we're going to give you the spooky season content pack. And here's like a couple new movies and a couple new sounds. And either those sounds would be randomly generated into the overworld or they would be another scene that you could go ahead and check out, right? Like you were on scene for this, collecting that information, and we could show you another part of Skillsville that you weren't able to get to. I also think there was one cool thing that we weren't able to do, but I think in this case it was good that we weren't able to do it. I like randomness and fuzz wherever we can get away with it. And one thing that I know you can do is add some jitter slightly, and this is kind of where the filtering came from, but like if you're strapped for time in terms of sound effects or playback, sometimes it's nice to do a slight pitch shift or a slight shift in terms of how fast or how slow something is, like very, very, very minor. But just so that like when you click on a cow and you hear the moo, sometimes you'll hear it a little bit faster. Sometimes you'll hear it a little bit slower. Sometimes it's a little bit deeper. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, and that adds a lot of texture to the game. But the thing that I think in retrospect, it was good that we weren't able to add that because it gave more emphasis to the filters. And it also, from like a scientific perspective, kept that one variable the same. So it was always going to sound the same in terms of like the cow mooing. What was cool about it was the filters, and it really played that up, right? Instead of having to spend a long time hunting for this randomly generated sound or shift or pitch shift, or situations where like then it might have been way more important to track which individual sound thing that you created and where that ended up, because like we showed you, like some of those sounds could stay inside of scenes, or maybe you wanted to get another sound and you accidentally recorded over that perfect cow sound, so now you have to go back and hear a ton of cows until you hear something close to it. It's nice to have the goals and make sure that it sticks with the goals, because that was cool, but it was really supporting the goal of being the Foley artist.
Yeah. Obviously, more content if we had more space. I love your idea of like having kids upload their own sounds for it. COPPA laws, like child protection laws, make any uploaded stuff really difficult if it's aimed at kids, but like it's possible. That would be so cool. One thing that I really would have loved, but we knew we weren't going to be able to do super early, but would have loved is if there was like more of a social sharing element, because we have this great thing where when you're finished with your work, you get to like see it and admire it in the movie theater. And I do wish that there was like more of an option to have that be outside of the game as well. Like if you could like export it as a video, or like, like save it into the camera roll of your phone as like a finished movie, like that then you could send to someone that like they could send to us, and then we could like post it online and be like, this is a movie made by this kid in this state, and it's like we get to see what choices they did for their movie. That would have been so fun, just to be able to like download that to camera roll and like let them do whatever they wanted, send it to parents or whatever. But again, it's all stuff that I think it stands alone without it. These are all just really cool extra features that if we had different circumstances would have been fun to explore. Thanks for watching us talk about how we made our game for PBS Kids Sound It Out. If you thought this was interesting, follow along Video Game Workshop. We're all over social media, YouTube, Patreon. We have a lot more behind the scenes content that we can post. We also talk about game design in general, and we're making our own games there too. So follow along, and thanks for watching.
Let us know if you have any additional comments or if you have any additional questions. We also like those.